Hi, good morning. My name is Mike Taylor. I work at Digital Science, where I'm head of metrics development. But I'm also quite old, and I've been working in publishing for a very long time. And I'm a huge books nerd. I really, really like books. I get very passionate about them. I would consider myself to be a part of the books community, which is a much broader subject, really, than my work at Digital Science. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start with making a few remarks about some experiences that friends of mine in the book community have been having as they move to establishing their books as objects that can be evaluated alongside other research outputs. And then later on, I'm going to be interrupting Martin as he talks about metrics to inject some of the input from my digital science perspective, particularly working on altmetrics. So books are really interesting because of what they represent. Whether it's someone who is writing a textbook, which will be shaping how a field is seen by the new generation, whether it is someone who is having their thesis published, or whether it's a book that's about a topic that is discussing the current state of the topic and future directions of it. Books are a rite of passage. They say something very specific about the nature of a topic and about the nature of an academic's career. Now, nobody went into academic publishing to make money. That includes, all of the people who are in front of you today. Books are written. Books are a multi-year commitment from academics, and when they go about writing those books, they do so because they are going to get recognition. They're not doing it because of the royalty check that comes out of it. The book, the effort they put into it, is part of building their profile, building their topic, building their community. And it's an incredibly diverse range of people who are involved in books. I went to a conference last year in the UK, and someone there had done a report looking at all the different book publishers that were being used by their academics, and they reported that there were 400 different book publishers in the UK that were publishing books coming out of this university. Now, you know that there's going to be a very, very long tail in there. We know that if you look at the figures, probably 80% of those come from 5, 6, maybe 10 different publishers, but the rest of them are really small publishers. But they're publishers who have got a real role to play in terms of developing these niche areas, supporting the development of academic thought and academics in very narrow areas. And it's these people that I want to talk about. So I live in Oxford in the UK, where most of the time I'm tripping over foreign students, the rest of the time I'm tripping over academics. But one thing we all do is the people tripping over are academic publishers. There are a lot of us. I live at number 61. There is someone who does translation rights at number 63. There is someone who works in the NHS publishing policy at number 59. And I have a friend who lives at number 57, Tim Goodfellow. Tim runs a small publishing company. There are 2 people, Tim and Sally. They've been working, I think, about 10 years. They publish some books in hospitality and tourism. They're all academic books, some textbooks, some monographs, some contributed volumes. And because we are friends, because I've known them for a long time, we hang out, we talk about issues with book publishing. In the last couple of years, Tim and Sally have seen a real change in what authors are asking for and expecting from their academic publishers. They've seen that there is a big change, and the change is that previously authors wanted to have the recognition of being publishing. The sorts of questions they were asking up to 2 years ago were based around distribution. They were based around, is my book going to be audible by the library? Is it going to be available in the library downloading environments? Will I be able to go into my local bookstore and buy a copy of my book? Can my mum see a copy of my book? I mean, there were kind of questions about book publishing that people have been answering for maybe 10, 15 years. But over the last couple of years, there's been this real drive. And it's been matched slightly with an increase in interest in open access publishing. But nowadays, the kinds of questions they're being asked are, will my book be in Scopus? Are the chapters going to be citable? Are there digital object identifiers? Can I attach my ORCID? There has been a real paradigm shift in the way that they manage it. that they're being asked for by their authors. And it's really interesting this, because these two people, very common with hundreds of other small publishers in the UK and thousands of other small publishers around the world, they represent a very diverse framework of people, but they're having to really change their underlying business model. Now, I'm a good neighbour, right? This practically means that they've had a free consultant for the last 2 years, because they buy me out. Sally will cook me an omelette, and I'll look at data, and we'll talk about chips, and I'll try and figure out what's going on with the different DOIs and stuff. And what's really struck me is that even after 20 years of doing this kind of stuff, it's really, really hard to do this as a small publisher. Now, when I worked at a large publishing company beginning with E, I worked in the books technology group, and I was responsible for doing this at scale. Myself and Chris Shillam, we sat in a room in Radarway about 10 years ago. There was about 40, 50 people there, and we had this conversation about what we were going to do to get books onto Science Direct and into Scopus. It was a massive project, really proud. It was terribly, terribly successful. So I figured that 10 years after that, for me to help two people do this would be an absolute snap. It's really hard. It is so hard. But ultimately we were successful, right? So I helped them to get DOIs, help them to get a little bit of software written that would convert their metadata into the XML that they could then upload to Crossref, have the DOIs, and sometimes it works really well. So this is the proof of the pudding. So this is a 2017-2018 open access book, which was indexed by Dimensions. Now, I happen to work for Dimensions, but I had no intervention in here at all. They just did the DOI work, the metadata appeared in Dimensions, and as you can see, this book is being cited already. Right, so I think it's a really important thing to say. This is a really interesting book, 2017, already picking up citations less than 6 months into the publishing process. So for some extent, we managed to make it work, right? It's rather a Heath Robinson thing that you would say in the UK, of bits of tape holding it all together. But more or less, we've got this working. But it's important that when we reflect, when we say to an author about what citations they're getting, what usage figures they're getting, we need to be able to say, what is it that we are measuring? Because there's a really important thing about research evaluation in that we can only measure the measurable. And I don't want to get all quantum or all philosophical about it, but what is measurable in this case, from a book's perspective, is being in a platform like Google Scholar, being in a platform like Scopus, being in the book citation index, being in Dimensions. These are what make book chapters measurable. And these are the objects that mean that publishers like Goodfellow can report usage back down to their authors. They can satisfy the author's needs. So although this system that I helped Goodfellow build worked, it kind of doesn't always work. Now, when the last time I met Sally, was on Monday, and one of her books has just appeared on Google Scholar. We don't know what triggers books appearing on Google Scholar, by the way. She does the same thing for all the books. Some of them appear on Google Scholar, some of them don't appear on Google Scholar, and nobody at Google ever gets back to you when you find out. But she was a little bit thrown because one of her books had turned up in the home improvement section of Google Scholar. It was tagged as being home improvement. Nothing to do with the metadata, and one of the links is a bit broken. So although it kind of works, this system works not very well. And just to emphasize the point, the Goodfellows have got me over the garden fence helping them sort this out. For an academic publisher who doesn't have that resource, or someone who is based in Yekaterinburg doing Byzantine architecture books, or someone who is in Fluvia in Brazil who is working on aquaculture books, or someone who is in Addis Ababa doing books about the evolutionary development of poultry, all of which, by the way, are real examples of people who are working in book publishing around the world. They have none of these accesses. The systems that we have that make books measurable are not universal. They're not easily accessible. There are things that work really well. So Crossref works really well. For whatever reason, the ORCIDs that we're putting into Crossref aren't coming out the other end at the ORCID system. I haven't figured that out either. There's a system called OAPEN, which they use for open access books. They produce really good downloadable figures. There's a great quote that Charles provided me this morning about traditional monographs sell on average 250 copies, but this open access title is being downloaded thousands of times. And this is really interesting because that matches up exactly with the kind of data that Goodfellow see for their books. So although they sell very small numbers of their academic monographs, this book, which is an academic book on the effects of Airbnb on the hotel industry, is seeing downloads thousands and thousands of times. I've roughed out a little Excel spreadsheet that kind of gives them a counter-equivalent metric that they can throw back at the authors. And they get counter-equivalent metrics back from OAPEN, trying to get usage value from other people, the other people who who carry open access books, is almost impossible. Systems don't like reporting values like this back to the publishers, but the publishers are being increasingly expected to be able to deliver that data back to the authors. It's a crucial part of showing value, and the authors are under pressure to give that data back to the funders. Right? This return loop, given that we don't have sales figures for open access books, given that there is an increasing emphasis on citation, on usage, on social impact, we need to improve the data chains that support small publishers to be able to carry on being part of this diverse world. And with that, I am going to Alt-Tab and hand you over.